The ocean breeze at Blackwood Cliff doesn't smell like salt. It smells like money, the kind of ancient, suffocating wealth that thinks it can dictate the laws of physics. For 18 months, I poured my soul into the Monolith, a $40 million masterpiece of glass and cantilevered steel hanging over the Pacific, designed specifically for Elias Thorne, a venture capitalist who viewed people as disposable assets. I wasn't just the architect. I was the structural engineer, the interior designer, and the glorified babysitter for a man who demanded a 3-story waterfall in a drought zone and a primary bedroom that hovered 60 feet over a jagged abyss without visible support columns. Every day was a battle against his ego, a man who would walk onto a live construction site in a $3,000 suit just to point at a hand-carved marble slab and tell me it looked cheap. I worked 80-hour weeks, personally supervising the installation of the proprietary smart glass system and the hydraulic stabilization foundation that kept the whole structure from sliding into the ocean during a storm. I warned him repeatedly that the coastal shelf was shifting and that the house required a specialized manual harmonic tuning every 6 months to prevent the wind from vibrating the steel frame into a structural resonance. He didn't listen. He just sipped his vintage scotch and told me that he didn't pay me to give him weather reports, he paid me to build his monument. The breaking point came on the day of the final walkthrough, when the house was 99% complete, and I presented the final invoice for the $2 million retainage fee. Elias looked at the paper, then at the stunning sunset through the floor-to-ceiling glass, and then back at me with a cold, predatory smile that told me he had never intended to pay the final bill. He claimed the view wasn't as panoramic as the 3D renders had promised and that the vibe of the guest wing was spiritually off-putting, a blatant lie designed to trigger a breach of contract clause. Before I could even defend my work, he leaned in, his breath smelling of expensive peat, and told me that I was a mid-tier draftsman who should be grateful he even allowed me to put his name on the project. He had his private security team, men built like brick walls, escort me off the property I had built with my own hands, throwing my personal drafting tools into the mud of the unpaved driveway. He told me I was trash, a peon, who didn't understand how the real world worked, and that if I ever sued him, his legal team would bury me so deep I'd never see the sun again. As the gates of the Monolith slammed shut, I didn't scream or beg. I just looked at the silver service override tablet in my hand, the one linked to the house's nervous system, and I realized Elias had forgotten one very important detail. He had fired the only person who knew how to keep the house from screaming. The next 6 months were a masterclass in patient, calculated silence as I watched from a distance while Elias attempted to turn the Monolith into the social hub of the billionaire elite. He threw lavish galas, invited tech moguls and politicians, all while the final $2 million sat in his overflowing bank account, a debt he thought he had simply deleted. What he didn't know was that I hadn't built a kill switch in the traditional sense. I had simply designed the house to be a living, breathing reflection of its owner's instability. The smart glass system I installed wasn't just for privacy. It was a series of liquid crystal layers designed to respond to specific frequency inputs. Using the remote access I'd never deactivated, because Elias was too arrogant to hire a secondary IT audit, I began to subtly adjust the polarization of the windows. During the day when the sun was at its peak, the windows would slowly turn a sickly, bruised purple, distorting the panoramic view he loved so much into a nauseating, kaleidoscopic blur. But that was just the visual component. The true revenge lay in the harmonic tuning system. Every skyscraper and cliffside home has a natural frequency, a hum created by the wind hitting the structure. Without my manual calibration, I allowed the hydraulic dampers in the foundation to slowly unsync. It started as a low-frequency vibration, something humans can't hear but can definitely feel. It's called infrasound, and at 18.9 Hz, It triggers intense feelings of dread, sorrow, and paranoia. Elias's guests began to complain of ghosts in the guest wing, of an unshakable feeling that someone was watching them. His high-profile parties began to end early as people felt inexplicably ill, plagued by headaches and sudden bursts of vertigo that made them feel like the house was tilting into the sea. He hired experts to check the air quality in the water, but they found nothing because the poison was the very air vibrating around them. I watched his social media posts go from arrogant tours of his fortress of solitude to frantic rants about shoddy craftsmanship and cursed land. He tried to sell the place for $50 million, then 40, then 30, but the House of Dread had become a legend in the real estate world. No one wanted a mansion that made you want to jump off the balcony the second you walked inside. He was stuck in a glass cage of his own making, haunted by a sound he couldn't hear and a view he couldn't see, all while his reputation as a taster of excellence withered in the sun. The finale came during the worst storm of the decade, a brutal Pacific gale that sent 50-foot waves crashing against the base of Blackwood Cliff. I was sitting in my small, humble apartment, 300 miles away, watching the weather feed on my laptop when my phone lit up with a restricted number. It was Elias, and for the first time in my life, the King of Capital sounded small, his voice shaking over the roar of wind in the background. He told me the house was moaning, that the glass was vibrating so hard he thought it would shatter, and that the entire structure was swaying like a ship in a hurricane. He begged me to tell him what was happening, offering to pay the original $2 million if I would just fix the glitch over the phone. I took a slow sip of my coffee, leaned back, and told him that I wasn't an architect anymore, I was just trash. Remember? I reminded him that he had said I didn't understand how the real world worked, and in the real world, you don't fire the guy holding the structural integrity codes. I told him that the harmonic tuning he had dismissed as a weather report was currently failing, and that within the hour, the resonance would reach a critical point where the steel frame would literally shake itself apart from the foundation. I heard him gasping for air, the sound of a man realizing his monument was about to become his tomb. I told him my new price wasn't $2 million, it was $10 million, 2 for the debt and 8 for the insult tax, and it had to be wired to an offshore escrow account within the next 10 minutes, or I'd delete the override software and let the ocean have its house back. He screamed, he cursed, he threatened to kill me, but as a massive gust of wind hit the monolith and a window the size of a garage door shattered in the background, his pride finally broke. The wire transfer hit my account 3 minutes later. I calmly logged into the system, engaged the emergency dampening protocols, and synchronized the hydraulics. The moaning stopped instantly, and the house settled back into its solid, silent state. I told him to have his bags packed by morning, because I had also filed a massive anonymous report with the Coastal Commission regarding his illegal waterfall and smart glass radiation levels. By the end of the week, the monolith was condemned as a safety hazard. Elias was forced to move into a generic penthouse in the city, his reputation ruined and $10 million poorer. I used the money to start a firm that builds low-income housing for people who actually appreciate a roof over their heads. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I like to think about Elias sitting in his quiet penthouse, wondering if the walls are starting to hum again. Elias Thorne thought his money made him untouchable, but in the end, it was a simple frequency that brought him to his knees. If you think he got exactly what he deserved, hit that like button. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. We've got plenty more stories of billionaires learning hard lessons. Tell me in the comments, what would you have built with that $10 million? Thanks for watching.